All right, live once again, and of course, another 5 second delay. But what I want to do in this live stream is talk a little more about what I think trauma is, and then the actual process of release, and give you actually clear definitions and really workable things to understand these concepts at a more clear and straightforward and direct manner. Why this is important is because, nowadays people are saying trauma can be anything for anyone. Um, and at that point, of course, there's a lot of validity to that. And then at the same time, people are using the term in perhaps maybe not the most accurate or efficient manner. So that's what I want to go over. And I'll talk about kind of the common things that people are doing and the benefits that they might have, and then how they fall short. And then I'll talk about the process and methodology that I've personally found to be useful and that I've seen to be useful in a lot of people. That's more or less coming from internal arts, and then really breaking down some of the key distinctions and why I think that is true and why I've personally found it to be a lot more effective. So really continuing on the same theme of the last few live streams in terms of talking about the healing benefits of internal arts and these different approaches. So someone asked, can trauma cause double vision? Um, I mean, yeah, obviously I can't answer too specifically because I don't know, number one, what you mean by trauma, number two, exactly what you mean by double vision. But definitely, of course, that can, blunt force to the head or dysfunctions in the optic and cranial nerves, around the base of the skull. Of course, that can cause things, or pressure in the skull, impinging nerves. Obviously, yeah, it could cause those types of issues because in some ways, things can be very simple. Where if you think about, you have a hose of water and you just grab one end of it or tie it up or tie a knot in it, then the fluid flow through that hose is going to be impeded. It's going to be less efficient, and it's going to probably cause problems down the line. In the same way, blood vessels, veins, arteries, nerves in the body, very similar thing. Just need to um, remove the impingements. I had a huge fight without getting hurt, but it did shock me after I had double vision. Yeah, I mean, you might want to see someone for that, and perhaps remove some of the trauma or the contusion or the inflammation from the localized area. So, anyways, I think how most people typically approach these subjects is from one or three of these major lenses, from what I've seen in my own life and what I've personally lived through, and from what I've seen really common in the industry. Um, how can I do that? Find someone that does craniosacral, or someone that does, subtle body work, or you can just look me up on Instagram, send me a direct message, and tell me a little more what's actually going on, and I can try to point you in the right direction. Um, so that's what I would recommend. So, anyways, I think it shows up in one or three ways. Usually, first is excessive mental tension, which usually just tends to reinforce itself. People trying to cognitively, intellectually work their way through, things that are actually trapped and stuck in the nervous system. So, actually, it makes more sense for me to define what I mean by trauma while I'm even talking about it. So, first, let me switch gears and just talk about my actual definition and what I actually think what it is, and what it actually comes down to. So, I look at it as something that puts a distortion into your nervous system, which causes it to skip or glitch. So the way you can look at it is, if you have a record on a record player, right? And let's say you do something um, to that record that like distorts it or puts a glitch in it or scratches it. And then every time the needle goes through it, it jumps or it skips or it gets distorts or something throws it off. So the output is distorted based on some distortion that's put into that record. And every time the needle passes over that groove, then it causes a problem. Now it's the same thing in the nervous system, whether for a lot of people, maybe it's situational, maybe that thing only shows up when the needle goes over, relationships or money or survival or something, but then maybe other areas of their life it's totally fine. And then perhaps for other people, it's just someone just took the record and scratched the whole thing. So every 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 pass is just distorted and every song on that album is just completely whacked out and messed up. Um, so that's how I look at trauma. And of course, based on how a lot of people use the word, that could be anything in a way, yes. But we have to make distinctions and clarifications because, on one hand, yes, it could be anything because literally anything, any life experience can and often will have an imprint on you and shape you in a certain way and, put some kind of distortion on the record, so to speak. That's just normal, natural part of human life. Could be positive, could be negative. So I don't think, at least for me, I don't think that's really a great usage of the term. I think if it comes to a point to where it's like undermining, it genuinely undermines someone's ability to fulfill the basic functions of life. Now we're talking about it. So I think there's a big distinction between people just kind of being neurotic or being really self-absorbed or being fixating on really, you know, small feelings that they have versus people who genuinely are terrified for their life or afraid or can't function in like a normal way, meaning like the basic facets of their health are impeded. Their body's in a constant state of inflammation and agitation and conflict. They can't hold down relationships. They can't hold down jobs. They have maybe addiction issues, substance abuse issues. Maybe they have violence issues or any different permutation of kind of addiction. So at that point, they're really hindered from even in any way, shape, or form just having a normal, basic life. Like even fulfilling normal, simple tasks for them can be extremely difficult, extremely stressful. Just leaving the house, just socializing, just meeting people, just doing basic things can be really, really challenging and really, really difficult. Not because they're just stuck in their head and simply just, being neurotic, but because things in their nervous system are screaming at them, are working against whatever it is that they're trying to do. And even if they have all the best information, all the best attitudes, all the best supplements, herbs, diets, they have everything else checked in, but their nervous system is still screaming at them, then I would say, okay, yeah, that seems like a legitimate trauma situation. Whereas I think for a lot of people that how they label the term, the things that they are labeling it would probably go away if they got a little bit more fit, or maybe they had more friends, or they just basically sorted out really simple, basic life things. A lot of the other things would just kind of go away. But we kind of live in a world where people tend to not want to define things, not want to have parameters, take everything at face value, not look at it any more deeply. And we're, at a place where, feelings are facts and all of these other kind of attitudes, which are great if you're trying to accept and include everything and everyone. But I don't think they're actually very effective in actually helping people beyond a very low line baseline thing. So I just wanted to clarify that's what I mean by that term, and that's how I'm using it, so that when we move forward in this conversation, you kind of know what I mean and how I see it and have that kind of sort of image for it. So going back to what I was saying, people tend to try to tackle this in one of three ways. First is usually the excessive mental stimulation, which usually just reinforces itself, and that creates a whole thing, which basically just locks up and binds up the nervous system even more. The second approach is through just stimulation. So, people getting really into cold plunges, really into drugs and psychedelics and plant medicines and all these types of things, which I just want to say as a caveat, can obviously have benefit. I think in terms of my official view, in terms of plant medicines or psychedelics, I think microdosing can certainly be helpful for many people. And certain singular experiences in a therapeutic controlled environment can help shake people out of a pattern so that then they can kind of maybe build on that. I think those use cases can be helpful for certain people, but I think the recreational cavalier, figure it out on your own, just the way in which a lot of people go about it, I think that's a recipe for disaster. And I think we're already starting to see a lot of the negative results, and we're gonna see even more negative results over time as these things get more popularized. So I just want to clarify that, and because a lot of people will get very upset about that thing. But the fact of the matter is, for most people, most of the time, it's just stimulation, or people smoke weed or use alcohol or whatever. And it's like in the short term, it feels like it's helping, but actually in the long term, it's usually causing harm. Um, and then the third is just pure emotional indulgence, which I can think of a lot of these kinds of workshops where people go to just like get out their emotions. They spend a weekend just crying and hitting a pillow or screaming and doing these things, which, okay, yeah, I could see how that could be useful if you're starting at absolute zero and you've just been completely pent up forever. Yeah, I mean, a weekend of that could be like, ah, wow, okay, give some breathing room maybe. But what I've seen is that usually people just kind of get addicted to that, and their catharsis just becomes another form of stimulation and just reinforcing the thing, because as we'll discover and become more clear as I work through this framework, those things will just reinforce the thing that we're trying to move away from, because it lacks a lot of the structures, frameworks, and parameters that I'm going to explain as we move through this. So, of course, these things can have value. Talk therapy and talking about things and having awareness about things can be useful, of course. And, having these experiences with plant medicines and microdosing, whatever, can be useful, of course. Or just, you know, getting really, really into your emotions and digging through your shadow and all these things can, at a certain point, have some validity depending on where a person is starting. Of course, I'm not saying that that is not the case. What I am saying is that, as someone who's been into this for 20 years, I haven't seen people that have actually produced genuine results from those things. I've seen incremental, slight changes and adjustments for sure, but I haven't seen anyone just say, "Phew, okay, case closed. I'm done. Move on with my life." I have seen people say that, but in actuality, they're just worse off and they're just deeper in. Like I said, I've told stories about this in previous um, live streams, so I won't do that now because that's not the point of it. But I'm just saying, in my mind, the way I view it is kind of like, if you have an injury and you spend the rest of your life thinking about the injury, you probably didn't heal from the injury. Or if you're living from that distortion, you didn't actually heal it, you're just living from that distortion and basically coping, which sometimes that is the best you can do, of course. But I wouldn't call that healing, I would call that coping, which are two different things. What I'm interested in personally is actually healing, meaning removing it from the system, forgetting about it, moving on, and actually getting to a place of normality to where you just can live your life without the agitation, without the distortion that was causing the problem in the first place. To me, that's what I'm interested in. That's what I've been trying to pursue. That's what I've been trying to find for myself throughout my whole career in this sort of industry. And the last thing I'll say is that, from what I've seen, the buffet approach that I think what a lot of modern people are doing is like doing a little bit of this, doing a little bit of that, doing a little this, a little that, a little that, and I've done this, I've done that. And you talk to people and they have this vast resume of all of the healing things that they've done and they're doing and they're in, and that people they've trained with, they've done all these things. And you know, I've been there, I've done it. And of course, like I said, there can be value in it. People can gain, you know, insight or wisdom or useful things from these things, of course. But what I've seen is very often that just puts more distortion and more dissonant things into the system. Because like you have this thing over here that's it's like if you took like if you took a record and you put songs in it, and every song had like, or I'm trying to think of a good way to describe this. It's like if you had all these different things going in different directions, trying to do different things. It's like if you had a record, and if you look at the record, and usually the grooves are all laid in the same way, right? But like, let's say you had one section of the record, it's laid this way, and another section of the record is laid another way, then another section is laid another way, and then it all kind of overlaps. Then when you play it, it's just going to be like ear screeching chaos. So when I see people's nervous systems, and when I see how my nervous system was when I had that buffet approach, it's kind of like that. You have all this kind of dissonant things that are getting jammed in your nervous system on top of already the pre-existing stress and tension and anxiety and trauma or whatever. And then it just creates this really dissonant, kind of chaotic, agitated thing, which if we're trying to move away from agitation, we're trying to move away from distortion, then more agitation and more distortion are probably not going to be very useful or effective. So that's just what I've seen. And again, the distortion is something that really causes the record to skip or glitch, which this is the same thing in the nervous system. These glitches go in there, these distortions go in there, and then they basically cause this irritation in the system that just constantly starts feeding back to itself. And then it's kind of like if every time you woke up in the morning, there was just someone next to you screaming in your ear. Like, for a while you might be able to cope, but at a certain point your system's going to just start to shut down, or you're just going to go to the other extreme and go to complete agitation. But it's like everywhere you went, there was like someone just screaming at you all the time. That's kind of how these things feel, and that's kind of how it is. It's just there's this constant irritation, this constant distortion that you're always kind of reacting to. So then when you interface with the world, you're not just reacting to that thing, you're reacting to that thing and the person screaming at you or yelling at you or hitting you or irritating you in some capacity. So you're not really viewing the situation or reacting to it as it is. You're reacting to these multiple other facets. So you're already kind of in this distorted, a little bit disassociated place. And then that can, of course, take people down many different interesting directions. And this is, of course, there's a spectrum to it. In some ways, what I'm describing is more and more common, just the normal baseline of human life. Whereas maybe the irritation isn't some trauma or whatever. It's social media and the news and politics and music and media and movies and porn and video games and all these things that are just constantly irritating people, constantly eating away at them. And, 24/7, their whole existence, they're just irritated and just bothered and inflamed and just not at ease, not comfortable, not normal, not neutral at all, because they can't be, because there's all these distortions and glitches in their nervous system. So I think that's more or less a way of illustrating and understanding. And for people who live that world and who have been through it, I don't need to explain it. They know what I'm saying very well. For people who maybe haven't done, then maybe that's something to at least think about and to consider, that this is really what's driving a lot of people. So, how this relates to internal arts, how this relates to genuine processes of releases and unwinding things is what I'm going to try to explore and illustrate now. So, typically, what happens is if there's this distortion or glitch or irritation in the system, the body will on one hand start to want to protect it and numb it out and kind of make you forget about it as just a protective survival mechanism, which of course makes sense because, you know, thankfully you have that and you can kind of bury that pain, that or that whatever, you can push it to the unconscious or push it out of your awareness. However, it's still affecting you, it's still driving you, it's still, um, you know, shaping you in many ways. And then what happens is the system develops and shapes around that distortion pattern and basically will get better at that pattern. So, like, if you're really angry or you're depressed or whatever it is, your system will just get better at being depressed. It will get better at being angry because that's how the system is shaped. And then the more your awareness is interacting with it and giving it positive feedback, meaning attention, stimulation, validation, whatever, and that can be positive or negative, because, like I said, attachment and aversion are two sides of the same coin. So as long as it's being fed with that thing, then it just keeps growing, and that just becomes more ingrained and more a part of someone's identity. So then, by that logic, when we go back and look at the three things that I listed before about the excessive mental tension and trying to intellectualize everything, or the stimulation approach, and then the emotional indulgence, that's, you can see how that will just kind of reinforce and strengthen that thing because you're just giving it the fuel, you're giving it the validation, and you're just more or less training your system to be more efficient at that distorted pattern. Which, again, more often than not, this is what I've seen in myself in past year and past times, and then seen in quite a lot of people as well, and seen pretty widespread throughout just the industry in general, because this is just a natural function of the body and the physiology. So genuine release typically needs a point and a counterpoint. It needs to release against something and release into something. Otherwise, it's more or less just some kind of random chaotic thing, which will usually either reinforce the pattern that's already there or just weaken the system. Because there's a huge value and importance of having an actual structure and actual parameters, meaning something to release into. So this is where the language that's often used to describe various aspects of internal arts is not really accurate or that helpful, because if people just say relax or release or let go, I mean, that those actually are not that's not the full story, let's say, because it's more so like you have to build and establish the structure that you can then release into. Once you have something you can release into, you also have something you can release against. So I guess one easy way to illustrate this is like, if I just relax and let go, just everything switches off, everything compresses. And I wouldn't say, I mean, yeah, that's temporarily relaxing, but that wouldn't really be that healthy for my body. And it's just retraining my body to go slack and to be compressed and to be pretty like flaccid and weak, which I wouldn't think those were qualities we would want to have our body build. Whereas if I have established the parameters and the structure of something to release into and to release against, I can tap in, I can go into that and then relax and release into that structure and against that structure. And then my body has the opposite response. It actually elongates, stretches, like expands, becomes more buoyant, becomes stronger, like my tissues become firm and elasticated, and things naturally start to unwind and open, but not just naturally unwind and open into the structure and through the structure based on all the parameters and things that are set up. So I know it's a pretty limited, maybe weird, not really that obvious kind of illustration, but it does illustrate the points of one hand just, "Ugh," which is what a lot of people are doing, or this, "Okay, hold myself in tension, hold this posture." But then what happens? Oh, I'm distracted. Oh, wait, I gotta do this. And I'm distracted. Oh, wait, I gotta do this. I'm distracted. Uh, versus the other approach, which is release and relax into the structure. And then, really, without much effort and without really any stress or tension, there's a different quality which is passed into the body, which is elastication, lengthening, opening, stretching outwards, decompression, unwinding, letting go, releasing, all these things. But it's a very different process. It's a very different outcome. It's a very different thing altogether. But you could use the same words to kind of describe them, but obviously each one will produce very different results. So my point is that what I think a lot of people are doing when it comes to healing work or trauma release and these things is they're doing the first, which just either is excessive like tension, trying to hold themselves in some posture through like willpower and mental effort, which you can do for a while, but it's just going to create more tension, or just slacking and like switching off and going flaccid and just weakening the system, versus actually having genuine release, which is based in point counterpoint and based in releasing against something and releasing into something, so that you actually develop specific qualities along a specific process of development. So, for example, how we can circle that all around and relate it back to trauma. If we understand that trauma or these glitches in the nervous system are in the nervous system, how can we interface with the nervous system really the most directly? Well, usually that's going to be the spine, because you have your spine in the middle and then all the nerves that are branching off, that are just innervating and connecting to everything in the body. And then also, at least within internal arts, that would be like, and even Chinese medicine, that would be like the Du channel or the governing channel, which would be running up the back, or the bladder meridian as well. So basically, if you can release, can you actually start to apply the mechanics of release in the proper context and the proper point counterpoint, then unwinding these things out of the spine really starts to literally open and release all the nerves from the spine, which then starts to actually remove the glitches from the nervous system, release the distortions that tend to be just self-reinforcing. Whereas once it's actually removed, then that gives the body the ability to start reinforcing a different pattern. But it's really comes again down to very physiological, grounded, tangible, logical, rational kinds of ideas, mechanics, and processes that are not based in mental abstraction. They're not based in emotionality. They're not based in doing drugs. They're not based in chemical addiction. They're not based in chemistry in any way, shape, or form. It's just based in simple mechanics that, of course, can lead to a lot. And of course, there's a lot more going on than what I'm talking about. There's a lot more to it. There's a lot more to all of the internal arts and all of the mechanics and all the processes and but just being very, picking out one little thing and actually focusing on that in the most simplest, direct, general kind of introductory way is really what I'm trying to do, and what I've been trying to do over the course of the various live streams that I've been doing. So at least in my direct experience and what I've seen within other people and what I've had told and taught to me through numerous teachers, I think this is actually the methodology to genuinely releasing trauma and removing it from the system, and not just reinforcing it. It's a way of doing it where You don't have to engage with the emotionality of it. You don't have to engage within trying to figure it out or work through it or shadow work it or process it or really any of the intellectualization that people are doing. It's actually breaks it down to the thing directly that it actually is. And this is where I've definitely noticed over the years I lose a lot of people and have lost a lot of people. Um, is that I tend to speak about things in this way, meaning I'm not coming at it from over intellectualization. I'm not coming at it from emotionality. I'm not coming at it from, you know, aggressive stimulation seeking. So then people tend to be lost and confused because this is typically how people are wired. And it can only relate to subjects through those things. Why? Because for one, that's just natural and normal human things. And number two, that's kind of all they have, which is normal and natural, but also for all of us, myself included, those are major limiting factors. Um, so yeah, let's see. Sorry, I only got into this 26 minutes into live. Are you covering TRE exercise by David Brissell? Um, no, not really. I don't. I think those can, of course, help certain people, but I think based on what I said, was which I'll repeat, is that genuine release needs a point and a counterpoint. It needs to release against something. It needs to release into something, not just release. Because yeah. I'm not going to go through all of it again. I would say just go back and recap the different illustrations that I gave. But I tried the TRE stuff a few times, and I didn't really notice anything from it. Um, it was actually kind of it was an uncomfortable class that I went to um, because of the Neigong training that I had been doing, and I actually went with a friend of mine who'd also done Neigong. We didn't even have to do the exercises. We could just do the mental command, and then the body would just start shaking or doing whatever kind of release process, like instantly. And the lady was like, "Oh my God, I've never seen anyone who would just get into this like that." And we're just like, "Oh yeah, who knows? Like, wow, this is cool." And then we were both laughing because through the Neigong training we've done, there's a certain mechanic where you train any and every emotional release or experience in your body to come out as laughter because that has a dispersive releasing effect and it's just more pleasant than sadness and grief and anger and all the other things. So we're basically in this class laughing and initiating the process very easily, very comfortably, doing it for like half hour in a row. And the lady's like, "Oh, are you?" Like she's very confused. And then it's like 5 or 6 other women in the class that are just bawling and crying and very sad. Meanwhile, it's just two dudes laughing. So we were both like, yeah, we probably should not be going there because we don't want to make them uncomfortable. We don't want them because they don't know Nagong. They don't know what our context. They don't know why we're laughing. They don't know all these things. So like they're going through this emotional experience and they're crying and we're laughing. It's just it was like, yeah, we don't want to be raining on their parade or making people feel weird or uncomfortable. So we just stopped going and also just didn't really notice anything from it. I mean, I can mentally at will just initiate that sort of shaking, releasing response in the nervous system um, just from doing Neigong. Could just be like, okay, this tension here, okay, release it. And then my body will start like shaking or doing whatever, right? Okay, my tailbone's shaking, my legs. But okay, my nerves feel tingly and I feel a little high because like I just got a rush of nervous system energy. But is that really going to release? I don't know. Um, but at the same time, for people who have been through a lot, who are not going to do, who literally don't have the time, energy, attention, or capacity to do other things, yeah, it can be beneficial. And if it helps people, I'm all for it. I'm just saying personally, based on my experience, what I've seen and what my goals and interests are, doesn't really line up. But I can see how it can be beneficial for some people, and I highly recommend it if that's something that they think can help them. Um, and the guy's mind is kind of in the right way, but it's missing a lot. And I think this is true of really all the trauma people in that are popular these days, whether it's like Gabriel Mate or Mate or the German guy, or the Peter Levine or something, maybe his name, the like Vegas nerve guy. Um, there's a few Vegas nerve people, and then like the attachment theory people, and then the TRE people. Like they all have kind of a couple rice grains of something that's true, but no one has like the actual legitimate system and the actual like frameworks and parameters, because they don't fully understand the process and the mechanics. Not saying that I do. I'm just saying that the arts definitely do, because the arts and the people that put them together were some of the most capable human beings that have ever existed, and they understood things and organized things in such a way. Um, so yeah, have you covered where you think most people get this wrong and how they may be actually re-traumatizing themselves and making it worse? Yeah, I did that in kind of the first section where I talked about these are the common approaches, and here's where, of course, it can be useful, it can be helpful, and here's where sometimes it goes wrong. So, I just want to clarify, like, if something helps someone and helps them get out of pain and they like it, I have really no issue. And I never have, and I never will, because pain sucks. And life can be very difficult, very painful, very uncomfortable. And if someone can find relief in a way that's not overtly harming themselves or other people, then do what you got to do. I just try to define my parameters, my goals, my definitions, and then say why I think what I think and how I got there, and people can make up their own minds. So hopefully that makes sense. What's your best thing to release it? Basically everything I've been saying for the last 37 minutes and 10 seconds is literally me explaining the best thing to release it. Also, previous live streams that I've talked about is literally and exactly that. In terms of the actual practice mechanics and methods, I'm not going to be teaching that for free on YouTube. That's for sure. Because there's a lot of ways people can get it wrong and will get it wrong. There's ways in which it can go wrong and cause harm. And there's ways in which people could basically, misconstrue. So that's why I just don't really feel comfortable being like, okay, here's all the methods, here's the practices. And also, it's a very valuable thing that I've spent a lot of money and a lot of time to accrue. So I feel like there should be some sort of value exchange in that. And it's something that can really help people. Has really helped me. So that's why I'm putting together a course. And this is just talking about different things and different ideas and principles and concepts and frameworks along that line. But since trauma is a really, buzzword, a hot word, I just wanted to define it and tell people, what's what in terms of my opinion. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I have from my outline. And I just wanted to go in and talk about some of these things, partially because it's front of mind, because of just the work I've been doing on my spine the last couple of months, just opening it up, and how it's really opened up and decompressed and changed like my body completely. My hips, my knees, my like every joint is different. And then even today, I'm like very tired I worked my spine for really not that long yesterday. And then afterwards I was like, ooh, okay. Yeah. A little bit of that delayed onset. But luckily I was a little wiser and I stopped myself, because my attitude is sometimes a little too heavy-handed of like, oh, a little bit's good, so a lot must be better, or I got to do this for 3 hours. And then luckily it was like, you know what? it's my spine and I'm really getting this to work. And so maybe just this hour or hour and a half that I did, like maybe let's just leave it there because I need to be able to walk and like sleep later. And I'm glad I stopped where I did because I think I still did a little too much because it was a little challenging to go to sleep because my body was just like, oh, what in the fuck is this? What is going on? um, so that's kind of why today I'll probably take it a little easier, maybe, but and just kind of let it sink in. But at the same time, I was like, okay, these methodologies that I've been trying to get work or trying to get to work finally got them to work. And it's the funny thing about, these many of these different practices is like you put in all these hours and you're just kind of like almost going through the motions, and it's just drudgery, it's repetition, and the amount of results you get out of it is like small. You feel something happens, you're practicing it, you're working through it, you're correcting errors, but then it's like there's these other times where you start to actually get it to work, and then you get so much more out of it in like a fraction of the time. So then you're confused because your mind is like, well, wait, we have to put in hour, 2, 3 hours to be able to get this to work. But then the reality is like actually you can really crank it and get it to work in like 5, 10 minutes. So then you have to just readjust and be like, okay, well, guess I don't have to hammer this one so much, or at least, let it rest and integrate and then come back and see where we land and try to, hammer it again. So it's just kind of how it goes. So it's also one of those things where people always want hard rules or fast rules or give me this and give me that. And it's like, I think you can do that for a little while. And then at a certain point, there's there's the common sense and the logical part of yourself that has to understand the why to be able to adjust appropriately. And I think for me, that's why I try to emphasize the reasons why things are a certain way rather than saying it is this way. And share why, because then people can make their own decision about whether that's appropriate or relevant or useful for them. Because I don't think, like, I've made videos being very critical of psychedelics, right? But at the same time, I can see plenty of instances for plenty of people where it can be very helpful, where it can be very useful, and where it can, give them the thing that they might need to really help their life. So I can have both of those views at the same time. So rather than saying it is this or it is that, then perhaps the reasons why, and then arrive at your own decision to see if contextually it makes sense. At least that's how I look at it. I know a lot of the world does not function that way. I know a lot of the world is you're either this or you're that, and there's nothing in between. So like I mean I can tell you great examples. I made a video saying how the the greatest conspiracy in the history of humankind is incompetence and stupidity and greed, which I think is historically absolutely valid. There's a lot of evidence for that. But because I wasn't overtly positive to conspiracy theories, I got a lot of hate from people who are like, you're an idiot, you're a shill, you're naive, you're stupid, you're an asshole, you don't know what's going on, you're asleep, you're a sheep, all these kinds of things. And I'm like, I'm not against or denigrating or saying anything you think or believe is wrong. I'm just saying I think if we look at a lot of these things, seems like stupidity, incompetence, and greed can explain a lot of things that a lot of people do. And to me, that seems more accurate, more useful than, you know, whatever else. But it's just because I wasn't overtly validating their preconceived notions, then they were attacking me and assuming, oh, you must be against it. So you must be a shill or whatever. And on the flip side, you had people that completely believe um, the regular narrative, the regular story. They're also like, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're crazy, you're weird, you're fringe, you're right wing, blah 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 blah. And it's like, guys, I didn't say for or against either side of this polarity. I said something actually a lot closer to middle of the road, which is objectively completely true. Like, if you look at a massive amount of historical events, incompetence, greed, and stupidity were absolutely involved. And were probably driving factors. And those things might actually be three sides of the same coin. um, so it was the same thing with plant medicines or many, many other things that I've done. So I realize a lot of the world approaches things and it's just this kind of gut reaction, emotional, like, is it this or is it that? Do I agree? Do I disagree? Do I like? Do I dislike? And that's it. And they kind of shut off anything past that. And that's really how our media works, functions on these basic propaganda talking points. But the thing is, if that's the way the world is, and that's the way people are conditioned the vast majority of the time, whether they are hippies, Republicans, Democrats, New Agers, spiritual people, and wherever they are on the spectrum, the fact is, this is how society is wired. So people are wired this way. So my point is, if these things are true and are true for pretty much all of us, myself included, and then we want to get into healing arts or spirituality or internal arts, wouldn't it make sense that you would have to unwind or remove or change or update or transform those exact programs and those exact conditionings? Because if you take those into those arts or those endeavors, I can almost guarantee you they will fail, or they will just become distorted versions and perverted versions that conform to this societal thing that you're claiming you're against. And that's been my basic thesis for the last decade. So, because that was just something that was apparent to me very early on in this journey, and something that I had to work through and sort through for myself and still am doing, because it's just part of human nature, part of being a social animal, part of being, socialized and whatever. So anyways, I'm just rambling at this point and not really on my original thing anymore. So hopefully, if you tuned in late, I would say go back and rewatch the earlier parts, because I broke everything down and explained it and explained the frameworks and even illustrated a couple things to hopefully share or paint a picture for what I'm saying and where I'm coming from, and things that have really, really worked for me. So if there's no questions, then I will dip out and leave, because I need to go eat breakfast and, live my life and whatever. But if there's any questions, then I'm happy to answer them while I'm still here. And then if also too there's any requests for future live streams, definitely drop those in, and I will be sure to do them. And then in the process, I'm also trying to work through creating my course and try to map that out, because I have so much info and data and practices and stuff. So I need trying to figure out what to include and how to map it, how to organize it for the most successful outcome. So yeah, there's no questions. So thanks everyone for showing up. I would encourage you and recommend and suggest you go back and rewatch the beginning and go over those parts. It's only really about the first half hour. The last, I guess, 18 minutes or so I've been just rambling and waffling. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, and thanks for all the comments, and enjoy the rest of your day. I'll talk to you soon.